Yeah, I am Jim Megellas calling you from my residence in Texas. I've talked before on this video and have had video messages taped and sent to you. But let me briefly reiterate or recap who that is, so that I can bring you up to date if you've been watching any the recordings that have come out of here. First of all, coming next March, I'll be 103 years old, 102 now, and I'm a World War II veteran that fought with the paratroopers and joined the 82nd Airborne Division in Africa at the beginning of the war, and fought in every major battle that they fought in ever since, all the way through the end of the war. And with the same unit, with the same company, I was a paratrooper through the whole affair. But more importantly is that when I came home, I felt that I had a story to tell about World War II in a way that was not written by the macro historians. That is to say, I was appalled, for example, by the fact that battles were always shown by the macro historians or written about in terms of the macro specs. That is, who the generals were and who the presidents were and the big names and so on. And they wrote about it in those terms. Yet I was a platoon leader in a parachute company, and during the whole war, I did nothing but lead men in combat. So I got to know pretty well who these young men were that did the fighting. Like, for example, I joined the military when I graduated from college. I graduated from college, and at the same time, I had a commission in the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant, because I had been taking Reserve Officer Training Corps, and therefore when I graduated I also qualified as an officer. So from there I went on active duty, and eventually I ended up with 82nd Airborne Division in Africa. And from that point on, I fought in every major battle. Not only fought in it, but in my position as a platoon leader, I led the men in battle. And I've written a number of articles regarding how you lead men in battle. And so when I wrote that book, my friends persuaded me to put what we had been talking about, what we had experienced about, to put it in writing, because it was a story that needed to be told. And I gave it considerable thought, discussed it with my family and others, and decided, yes, I'm going to do that. So at age 80, I set out to write my account of World War II. And I wrote it from the account of the young men who did the fighting, who smelt the gunpowder, who came face to face with the enemy, who paid the heavy casualties, who were successful in battle, who led us to victory. And the reason we prevailed was because we were a unique bunch of young men that fought for a cause greater than ourselves. Now, when I started to write about that, it was with that thought in mind. In fact, I said the reason I was writing my book was because I felt, first of all, macro historians did not really portray the battle as it was fought, the wars as they were fought, in the terms of the men who did the fighting and the dying, and then persevered and led us to victory. That was one thing. The other thing is, there was a tendency to glamorize war. No, that's war. There's no glamour in war. War is the most brutal form of human endowment, the most brutal form. and things that lead to war and the killing of each other are just brutal. So there's no glamour involved, although the showing of pictures of the war showed movie stars as the big heroes, as the people who led the attacks. And then after that, other acknowledgement fell upon them. But the men who did the fighting were not acknowledged. And the other thing was, they never pointed out the real reason why we prevailed in World War II. It is because we fought as a team, as a unit. We fought together things we believed in. We had a common cause. We had a purpose in being. And not only was it to survive, but also to prevail in combat and to keep our nation free and protect those values we hold dear. So I began writing this book, and to abbreviate this, I should tell you that I didn't start writing the book until I was 80 years old. I had graduated from college. I had a degree in mathematics, and I planned to become an engineer, but I ended up in the war as a second lieutenant and a paratrooper, where I stayed till the end of the war and continued after that. So in any event, that is my kind of story, and I like to say that one of the reason we prevailed was because of the leadership that was portrayed. Now, wars may be depicted and written about and observed and recorded at the macro level by macro historians and by generals and others who have written memoirs. And they do a great service. But it doesn't tell the actual story of the wars were fought. Who did the fighting? Who did the dying? What kind of men were they? This is World War II, mind you now. We prevailed. We did win. We did win. And those values we hold dear were kept safe. And so that's the story. So when I started writing my book and so on, I contacted all the people I could that were still alive to make sure that I was telling things as they actually happened. Although, as I said, I didn't start writing until I was 80, and I went into service. I was much younger, obviously much younger. So that, and so that was the purpose. In any event, I started out, and simultaneously there were others had similar interests in World War II partly from the same vantage point. And one of them, who's seated here with me right now, who's been instrumental in these recordings that I'm making now, his name is Rishi Sharma. And he's a young man who felt that the World War II story was never really told. And he felt compelled, therefore, to go around and talk to as many World War II veterans as he could, to get their story and to record it and somehow bring it forth to the public. So not only did they have the big picture of what happened in the war, but the men who fought it, how they fought it, how they worked together, the kind of people they were, the sacrifices they made, their families, their background, everything. And he, fortunate to me, had gotten a hold of the book I'd written when it came out, and he read it, and he was taken by it because he was somewhat on the same track. And he has been instrumental in doing what we're doing. And he's seated here right now and conducting this interview. So that is the story pretty much. And during the course of events, we did a number of things that I wrote in my book, elaborated on. I'm saying that he wanted students students to be aware of what war meant, where their freedoms come from, all the things we enjoy in this country. How did they happen? And to understand it and the nature of war and the brutality of war and all the rest. And he read my book and we found certain similarities. And that is, we were believed in a cause greater than ourselves. I've described my part and now his, and now he's here. Having said that, which is much longer than I anticipated on this occasion, I wanted to kind of summarize in a way what we have put forward and the battles that we covered. And we did these in battles that, major battles, that is, let us say, like the Battle of the Bulge, Normandy, and all these other places, Holland, and every major battle, and to put it in terms where people could understand it. And now, having said that, we sit back and we look at it, and I said, Rishi, we pretty much completed our mission, but I think there's some other things needed to be told. We had an objective. You knew what you wanted to do. I knew what we wanted to do. Our paths crossed. There were similarities. And now I want to put what we learned from our experience in World War II and what I learned can be useful to us at a time when it appears to be in this country we do not have the same dedication to the cause. We don't look at our freedom in the same terms as others did. And therefore, the civility sometimes that exists between us is not what it was between us as young men in World War II. And as a result of that, the country has been divided in a number of issues in a way that we look at it and say, we want to go back to where we were. Now, they called us the greatest generation. You've heard that term, the greatest generation. I say, first of all, the greatest generation has not yet been born. The greatest generation will be that generation which the young men get together and decide a way they can find a way to stop wars from young men killing each other, sometimes for causes they don't understand. Anyway, we had that in mind, and therefore we have these thoughts in mind as we look forward, as we plan forward in our objective. And one of the things that I find is our emphasis now at the national level seems to be involved more in security. We seems to be at war with everybody. We're at war with another country and then another. Sometimes we're not sure who our allies were. And then the political parties will always have worked together to produce the common good for all of us, now seem to be at odds. And therefore, what we now are involved in a situation where the emphasis is on war and security and differences and hard feelings between the parties. We think we have to get back to where we were when we prevailed, when we were the greatest. And we start out by an emphasis on two things. One of the things that has hurt us, and it continued, is we're still in a major war. This country, our country, the United States of America is still in a major war. We still are fighting a battle against drugs and drug smugglers and drug dealers. We have a war against drugs. We're fighting drugs every time you look around, and there's a battle. There are gangs fighting each other, and they're finding ways to bring drugs into this country, and to smuggle them in here, and to make them available to young people who have these. And it not only it distracts us from our main mission of what we believe in, but it also makes it difficult for the students, because now students are now the target. They're the target of these smugglers, these drug dealers, all these others that prevail. And they have found a way to reach our people and to get here regardless of what we say, not what we do. But what we ought to do is declare the war against drugs. And we find that war punishable, as a war would be. That is, if you violate the law, if you do something that in any way violates the law and what we fought for, then you are an enemy of the state, and you should face a penalty. And if you're a student, and I tell this to students, if you want to honor me and the men who fought for you to make this possible for you to come to this beautiful school, then lead your lives along those principles for which we fought. Obey the law. If the law says it's illegal to deal in drugs and to buy drugs and to use them, then don't violate the law. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't be a part of it. Because that's where the problem starts. The problem starts drugs, not with the drug smugglers. They've been there for some time. They've found a way to find the people who want the drugs. My experience, if I may digress a bit, dates back earlier when I was a USA mission director in Bogota, Colombia. And that was back in, I was with the State Department. And we were fighting a war against drugs then. And we blamed, at that time, the people who made the cocaine weed, out of which they extracted the cocaine, out of which they put it in labs, out of which they made the narcotic drugs, out of which smugglers then picked it up and brought it into the States, and soon enough, it was found its way in every school. We know that. I'm not making anything up. You're listening to me. You're aware of our problem. And unless we find a way to end this war, we're going to have to deal with it. Now, we end this war by claiming a war against drugs. And if you violate the law in any way, if you're a student and you bring drugs to school, you just are reprimanded in some way. You pay a penalty. You're thrown out of school. You're suspended. And worse than that, you're tried for criminal activity. You're tried for violating the laws of your state. You're a criminal if you do that. But the worst part about it is you give substance and strength and courage and purpose for the people who make this country bad. And I believe if I was in a position where I had something to say and know what I know about this, about the whole thing, about what they're suffering from, there are certain things that I would be in favor of. First of all, and a number of things, and if you'll bear with me, there are any number of things that I believe can bring us back to our greatness when we were great people, when we had a purpose in life, when we believed in things, and people looked up to us, and they obeyed the law. And smugglers didn't have a haven to be able to bring in drugs any way they want. And talking about smugglers, building walls to keep out smugglers hasn't helped at all. It isn't going to help because the smugglers have found a way to bring drugs in. And I relate back to an incident in my previous experience. When I was traveling in Colombia trying to implement our anti-drug program. And one of the things we came up with was we would burn out and defoliate the crops. That's what we do. We defoliated. And we would increase the border patrol, and we would do all these things. But then what do the drug smugglers do? They find another way to bring them in. And lately, we've thought by building a wall on our borders, that'll keep the drug smugglers out. I was going to read to you this trip I was making with someone in Colombia that was also in their anti-narcotics program. And he told me this. He says, you know, Colonel Megellas, he says, you don't realize this, but you are corrupting our country. You're corrupting my country because you're creating a demand for drugs, and the drugs are hard to handle. We don't have the resources to fight the drug dealers that you have. When we do one thing, they find another way. And this is what's going to happen now. And one of the laws should be that I would favor as one of the penalties. If you're a drug smuggler and you're involved with gangs and you have a shootout in any city and it's fueled by the drug program and you're involved in that and there's a death, then it should be the death penalty. You should pay a price. You kill the person. You're violating the laws of this country. Now, I'm telling you, this is an audience because there's so many other things we can do. We can increase our civility in this country between each other. Look to each other with respect. The two parties should look together and work together. They shouldn't be at odds. They should move forward on these programs. And the people should support them. And the parents should support their children. And the parents should be involved because the parents sometimes can head off a lot of these problems by stopping the flow of drugs and making this country unsafe for drugs. And if we did that, imagine, I'll imagine for you. If I was a parent and there was a law that said if my kid was caught with drugs, he would be thrown out of school, he may go to jail or pay a penalty, he'll lose some of his rights to citizenship, he would not be able to borrow money, he would not be able to go to college, he wouldn't get none of those benefits that we get as citizens because we're at war against drugs. And this guy who's buying the drugs, whether he knows it or not, is part of the enemy. He's part of the enemy. And so what? So if we throw some kids in jail or we make a reform center, but if we stop drugs and we stop the flow of drugs, this would be a country that would be great. We could stop building up barriers and walls as long as the demand for the product exists. Also, I would create within the Department of Defense a Department of Peace, who not only would be involved in working with other countries on peaceful ways to violate all these problems between each other and find a way to solve our common problems that are afflicting all of us. They would be involved in that. They would also be involved in checking on the program of the law against drugs. Of the law against drugs. And then they were involved in setting up penalties. How long someone should go to jail. A student, mind you, he goes to jail. Why shouldn't he? He's violating the law. He's the enemy of the state The state refuses to acknowledge it by saying, we're going to double our enforcement. We'll put more people on the border. We're going to build the walls higher. If I was in that position where I had the authority of a president and it was up to me, I would begin this way. In my oath, that I took an oath of office as the president takes, and you're familiar with that, that's every year at inauguration, the president stands up and holds up his right hand, promises to uphold the Constitution and obey the law and all that. I would include in my pledge never, never to lie to the American people about anything, And if I did, it's an impeachable offense. I don't belong to be president if the people can't believe me. Think about that for a minute. Put yourself in my position. You've seen all this, you know it. You know it's a fact. Everything I'm telling you is in writing. Either I've written it, or I've spoken it, or it's in speeches. I've made over 1,000 speeches. Everybody agrees with me. But what do we do about it? I don't know. Well, we're going to check the airports and make sure that their visas are okay. Well, what a joke that is. It almost goes back to when Ronald Reagan faced this problem of drugs. He says, we got a bad problem, the war on drugs. And we're dealing with it. And his wife comes out and says what the students should say when the narcotics traffickers come around and say no. Just say no. Don't buy them. Stop the flow of drugs. Stop the demand for drugs. And that's all as far as they went. So you're going to tell the kids, if somebody wants to hand you some drugs or give you some to peddle, just say no. Well, come on. You know, what do I have to do to impress you with this fact? Now, let me just say about my oath of office. And if I was president, and I knowingly, even though maybe it's only 49% know it, and 51% don't believe it, but knowingly, I was aiding and abetting in any way by my policies the war against drugs and the preying upon our youth and what they're doing to our schools and all the rest. And the parents would soon take note and say, look, I'm not going to be able to send my kid to college if he can't get a loan. I'm not going to be able to buy, you're not going to be able to get a car. I'll never have the money to buy him anything. So what does it mean that we made the walls higher and we got more people now to try and stop the flow of drugs? We have to have a war, an outright war. And I'm only mentioned a few of the things. I would have the Department of Peace and would have the same status to be in the cabinet. We'd give the same emphasis on peace, which will tell us of our progress against fighting against narcotics, to rid this country of narcotics and the plague that the traffickers and others have got, and have not been abetted, but they've not been stopped in any meaningful way. It may sound that I'm off a little bit. I am. I'm frustrated. I've lived through this. I've seen it. I know it. This is why I'm taking this time to go through this, and I'm not through. I'm going to come up with other ways that we can stop the flow of drugs without having to build more walls between neighbors and other things. There are other ways, and I can mention many more, but that's the beginning. And we will, from time to time, as I will, and if Richie's still on my team, and he's been a loyal member, and he agrees with me in everything we say. I will make sure that in many of the speeches I speak to, where I'm being honored, these were major factors how we fail to fight the war that's ruining this country, how we do not deal with it, how we look the other way. Now, I know I've talked a long lot, and I probably can do a lot more. But what I've said now, I can back it with every word, either written in DVDs that have been made of me, of the places we went to, the battlefields, to view all of these things. It's all in writing. Not only that, there are people like the History Channel that are disagreeing with the administration on lots of things for failure to recognize the people who are doing the battle for them. But they don't recognize it and they won't admit it. So there's a lot to be said. And this may not be the end of it, but I want this to be kind of my parting shot. First of all, I want to repeat, I thank all of you who are listening, who have listened, taken the time. I thank all of you who have listened to the others. And I've thanked all of you who've heard me speak and have supported me and believe in these things. And because I made over 100,000 speeches, I went to Afghanistan 3 times by myself to see the troops and to thank them for what they were doing and give them copies of my book and my videos free on my own time. And I did it the last time at a Christmas party when I went to Afghanistan to tell the men what a great job they were doing for our country, how important they were to us, how they were now with the family. They may be away from the family at Christmas, but you're with another family and you had a common thought. You believe in freedom. You believe in a cause greater than yourself. This is what we have to be in this country to once again be called the greatest country on earth, and for the people to be called the greatest America, the greatest generation. Truly, truly. Just think about this. Mull it around in your own mind now that I've thrown it at you. And if you get a copy of this, hear it again. And then, as I said, this may not be the end of it. But in conclusion, I once again want to thank all of you who agree with us that these things are important, that this is a great country, and it will be a great country. That's why I always say I'm still proud to be an American, which now I'm proud that I was, and that I believed in those things, and I'm proud to have been an American. But I'll be prouder yet if we do those things that we have to do, made us great once before. Once before. Thank you again for listening. And I hope that this makes some impact on you, because it's a battle that we have to fight and win. And each of us can become individuals in it by adhering to these things that I've just mentioned. And I want to thank all who supported me, and I want to again acknowledge this young fellow, Rishi, who has embarked on the same mission. We talk about the same things. We talk about a war that we can get people together from countries and form peaceful ways of settling disputes without the young men killing each other. That maybe isn't going to happen in our lifetime, but someday it will. It has to, if we're to survive, or if we carry out our Lord's will. Again, good night. Thanks for listening, and I've enjoyed talking with you. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank all of you. Thank you, Richie.